A young couple driven from their home. Friends that go out on a drive looking for ghosts and perhaps find a little bit more than what they bargained for. A father and son who experience something that they can still recall decades later. A strange tale in West Africa. And finally, a story that is so creepy that even the man who experienced it didn't want to believe it himself and denied it for decades, until finally he found out that somebody else had experienced exactly the same thing. The stories that I am about to share with you aren't ones that I have found online or hidden away in dusty old books. They have been hand-selected by a large number of stories that have been sent in by ordinary people who watch this channel. Now, before we kick off, let me just say a massive thank you to everybody that sent in their stories. I really do appreciate them. And there were quite a few that I wanted to include, but obviously I've had to try and tighten it out a bit. I've read through them all. And I have hand-selected 5 of the strangest tales that I believe are unexplainable. Ones that I also, after listening to them, they've stayed with me in my mind. If this video is successful, then I may make a part 2 because I'm still getting stories. In fact, I got an email this morning as well with another story. So yeah, I might do a part 2. If everybody wants that, let me know in the comments on this video. So if you're ready to listen for these 5 very strange stories from very ordinary people, then hang tight. That is enough waffle. So the first one comes from a viewer called Mike. Now, I'm not giving any last names in any of these stories, and I'm not giving specific addresses for their protection. However, Mike was okay for me to tell you that the property in question was in Bolton, which is in Lancashire. And he sent this story in to me. And to be quite honest, it was absolutely terrifying. So let me just tell you the story. It started one Friday night in the summer of 1997. At around 11:30, Mike woke to find a strange noise, almost like distant thunder, followed by what felt like a force hitting the front of the house. He looked out of the bedroom window, saw nothing, and eventually went back to sleep. But the following morning, he walked downstairs and discovered that all of the furniture in their open-plan living and dining room had been moved from one end to the other. In his own words, I just stood there thinking, what the? His girlfriend initially thought he was joking, but there was another strange detail. They'd set the house alarm before going to bed and the sensors throughout the property. Surely somebody moving furniture around downstairs would have triggered them. But the alarm didn't go off. Now, a few weeks later, this is when things started to escalate. And I just want to point out at this point, they'd not been in the house that long. It was a rented accommodation. So a few weeks later, things escalated. While the couple were watching television, CDs suddenly began flying across the room towards them. Then one Sunday morning, they woke to find downstairs filled with a smell of gas. Both the gas fires in the living room had been turned on. After that, they disconnected the gas supply to the fires completely. But perhaps the strangest incident happened while his girlfriend was home alone. She found herself unable to leave their bedroom because something appeared to be holding the door handle from the other side. Eventually, she spoke aloud. "Why are you doing this to me?" And according to her, an elderly man's voice answered, "This is my house, and you need to leave this place." She asked who he was. "I live here." Then suddenly the door was released, and she left and went to a friend's house. When Mike returned from work, he found something equally bizarre in the bathroom. The bath was completely full of shaving foam, and nearby was an old can of Gillette shaving foam dated 1987. A can he insists had never been in the house. I think he said it was 10 years old. It was way out of date. He can't explain where it came from. Now, after this, his girlfriend began having conversations with this voice, and it claimed to be an old man who had once worked as a postman bought the house and spent years renovating it himself. She asked whether he knew he was dead, and the answer was, yes, of course I do. He apparently wasn't interested in hurting them, he just wanted them out of what he considered his house. Eventually, in September 1998, they left. Before they did, the voice reportedly wished them luck with the new baby, but asked them not to let anybody else move in. His girlfriend explained that they couldn't prevent that. It was a rented property. The response was, they will regret it. And this is where the story takes one final disturbing turn. A young family subsequently moved into that house. Through a mutual connection, Mike's girlfriend later met the new tenant and was told that they too had experienced something very frightening. According to what she was told, their baby had levitated during the night. She advised them to get out, and they did. He tells me nobody ever researched the history of the house, so I can't confirm who lived there. But almost 30 years later, there is one thing he is certain about. He would never go back inside that house. Now, the next story I'm about to share with you is been sent in from a man named Michael. Now, I have noticed, just as I've been sorting these stories, that a lot of the people are called Michael or Mike. So I don't know how that's happened. I'm not taking the mickey, should I say. But yeah, anyway, so this is Michael. And again, we are still in Lancashire with this story. Michael and a group of his friends go out on a drive, but it's something that they would never ever forget. So let me tell you the story. It was around October 2005 when Michael, his brother, sister-in-law and a friend decided to go looking for ghosts. They'd recently watched an episode of Most Haunted filmed at Smith Hills Hall, I don't know if it's Smith Hills or Smith Hills, let me know in the comments the pronunciation, in Bolton, and decided to go and have a look for themselves. By the time they arrived, it was dark. They wandered around the woods and absolutely nothing happened. So slightly disappointed, they got back in the car and decided to take a drive around Rivington itself. At around 8 p.m, they were travelling along Rivington Road when suddenly all four of them heard something hit the car. First came a bang on the bonnet, then thud, thud. 2 impacts travelled across the roof, followed by another on the boot. Michael immediately slammed on the brakes. His first thought was that he'd hit a person or an animal. He and his brother got out and searched the road, even looking over the stone wall at either side. But there wasn't anything. There was no people, there was no animal. And strangely, there was no damage to the car. Now they got back inside, they turned around and they began heading home. But just a few more minutes later, they pulled into a small car park. Michael and his brother go out to get something from the boot. And that's when something strange happened. In his own words, 2 objects about the size of stones flew past myself and my brother between us and the car. Almost immediately, he felt as though something pushed him backwards. And then the boot slammed shut by itself. Really, really hard, he said. Both the men ran back to get inside the car, but by now the other 2 were frightened and shouting at him to start the engine and go. Michael was shaking so badly that he struggled to get the key into the ignition. And then, according to him, the car didn't start immediately either. Something he says has never been a problem before that, or since that. Although, interestingly, he doesn't necessarily blame that on anything paranormal. So this is interesting, because this shows me that Michael is a skeptic at heart. He told me, then again, I was shaking, maybe I caused the starting issue. Eventually the engine started, they got out of there, but the story wasn't quite over, because when the group got home, Michael felt his chest was hot and sore. He lifted his shirt and there was a large red mark across his chest. His brother and sister-in-law both looked at it and they all thought the same thing. It looked like a handprint. Michael said he'd only been wearing his seatbelt across that area, something that had never left a mark like that before. So we can get rid of the seatbelt theory. More than 20 years later, he and his sister-in-law still rarely talk about what happened that night, not because they've forgotten it, but because they're worried people simply won't believe them. 4 people were inside that car when something apparently struck it. 2 were outside when those objects flew past and the black boot slammed shut. So what happened on Rivington Road that night? If you know of anything, I mean, I did have a very quick look online, and that area does have other paranormal stories associated with it. So maybe there is something dodgy or strange going on in Rivington and along Rivington Road. If you know of anything, I definitely want to hear from you. Our next story, we're actually leaving the UK and we are moving over to West Africa. Now, this story was sent in by Nick. Nick commented on my video about the Langrick werewolf. And this is a slightly similar to story, shape-shifting, changing. So let me read the story to you and let me know your thoughts. Nick had been living in West Africa for several years, but his story actually begins when he first arrived. He and the other newcomers held a small party for some of the local men who'd helped them build their houses and settle into the area. During the evening, one of the men began sharing local myths and legends, and one in particular caught Nick's attention. Leopard people. Now, according to the story, these were humans who could transform into leopards, and the man claimed that some of them even lived in the local village. So, of course, Nick and his friends laughed at this. Oh, like werewolves, they said. The man's response was quite brilliant. I don't know, brother. We don't have wolves here. And that was pretty much that, until a couple of years later. So Nick didn't really believe this story. But he was walking home from a friend's house along a dirt track when a woman appeared from another track about 10 yards ahead of him. She was wearing full traditional African dress, and he assumed she'd been attending one of the many ceremonies held locally. So he carried on walking behind her. But then something changed. A strange mist or fog appeared around the woman's head. Inside it, Nick could see what he described as tiny pinpricks of flashing light. At first he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him, but he was completely sober and there was no mist anywhere else. And as he watched, the haze slowly spread until it covered the woman's entire body. Nick stopped walking, rubbed his eyes, and then, as the mist began to clear, he saw a tail. In his own words, as this foggy haze lifted, there, instead of the woman, was a full-grown leopard. Nick froze. His immediate concern was whether it was going to turn around and, as he puts it, have me for dinner. But it didn't. The leopard continued in exactly the same direction the woman had been walking, broke into a run and disappeared around a bend. Nick never saw it again. The following day, he went looking for the man who told him about the leopard people years earlier. When Nick told him what he'd seen, his response was simple. I told you, brother. You laugh, but we don't joke about things like that. Now, I did have a very quick look on the internet about the idea of leopard people. And let's just say that is rather large rabbit hole that I haven't really got time today to fall into. But I might save it for another day because it's a very interesting thing that's happening over there. Or I suppose it's like our werewolf stories. But what do you make of Nick's encounter? Have you heard of these leopard people before? Let me know in the comments. Now, I do get quite a few stories of people that have experienced things in the middle of the night while they've just woken up. And a lot of the time you can put that down to sort of sleep paralysis and other explanations about the subconscious and the conscious. And this next story, that's what I thought this was going to be until I started reading it. And I realised that there was one significant thing, and that is that 2 people had experienced the same thing. Wayne's story happened around 22 years ago when he was living in Luton with his family. One night his partner was working a night shift and his 5-year-old son Jordan wasn't feeling well. So he climbed into his dad's bed for the night. At around 3 a.m, Wayne suddenly woke up. There'd been no noise and nothing had disturbed him. He says he simply shot up bolt upright as if something was wrong. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he realised there was somebody standing at the foot of his bed. So his first thoughts was this was a burglar. So what Wayne did is he went to grab something from the side of his bed to either chase the burglar off, defend himself. But then when he turned back, the figure was gone. Now, he described it as being completely in black with what initially had looked like a large hood pulled down over its face. Now, at this point, like I say, it would be very easy to put this whole thing down to somebody waking up suddenly from a dream. Except Wayne then noticed Jordan, who was also sitting upright in the bed beside him, staring at exactly the same corner of the room. Now, Wayne deliberately didn't tell him what he'd just seen. Instead, he simply asked why he was awake. And Jordan replied, "That man woke me up." Wayne asked him where the man had been. Jordan pointed to the exact spot where his dad had seen the figure. Then he asked what the man had been wearing. All black with a hood over his head. And this is where these photographs Wayne sent me become really useful. They were taken a few years later, so the room, he says, has changed slightly. Now, looking back, Wayne says the clothing reminded him less of a modern hoodie and more of a hooded monk's robe, or as he jokingly put it, something with a bit of a Grim Reaper look about it. Now, neither he nor Jordan ever saw a face, but there's one final detail. Wayne hadn't actually seen the figure leave because he turned away, but Jordan had. According to him, the man simply walked, or seemed to dissolve, straight into the wall. I have saved what I think is the creepiest until last. Let me know whether you think it was. So this happened back in the early 1980s. Now, Mike sent me this story. Yeah, we've got another Mike. Mike sent me this story when I put a plea out for some road ghost stories to see if anybody had any experiences on Britain's roads. And he sent me this one in, and I was absolutely terrified. And to be fair, I can't look at a lamppost in the dark in the same way now. But here we go. This happened back in the early 1980s when Mike was a young man working mobile security around Birmingham. His job involved driving between industrial sites throughout the night, checking that everything was as it should be. And by his own admission, he had developed a rather efficient system. Get around the sites as quickly as possible and get home for an extra few hours in bed. Now, one night at around 1:30 a.m, he was driving along Wotton Lane at Water Orton. It was an area he'd known since childhood. There was no traffic around, nobody walking the streets, until he noticed something beside a lamp post. At first it was just a shape, then as he got closer, the shape seemed to distinguish itself from the post, and he realised it was a person, a very thin man, dressed completely in black and wearing a top hat. As the van approached, their eyes met, and Mike described them as two pools of darkness looking at me, if darkness can be darker than the black shape that appeared to me. And he remembers getting the distinct impression that whatever he was looking at was amused, almost as though it was pleased that it had frightened him. Then the figure began to change, and in Mike's own words, the man started stretching upwards nearly as high as the lamppost, and then it arched itself over the car. Its body and legs remained in front of him, while its upper body stretched completely over the vehicle. Its hands touched down on the road behind, upside down, and its face appeared at the rear of the car, looking in through the back window, and then it vanished. Now, for years, Mike put the whole thing down to tiredness. Obviously, he's been working nights. It was 1:30 in the morning. Perhaps his exhausted brain had simply created something bizarre from a shadow beside a lamppost. Until a couple of decades, he barely thought about it. Until one Halloween, he was listening to a radio programme. A woman began describing an experience she'd had while driving on a motorway slip road in the north of England. And what she described sounded remarkably similar to what Mike remembered seeing that night. Until hearing that programme, he says he'd never heard another story like his. It was only then that he heard a name being given to the phenomenon. The Thin Man. And that is where I'm going to leave this one, because rather than me disappearing into a paranormal rabbit hole, I want to know something first. Has anybody else watching experienced anything like this that Mike describes? Not necessarily something that you've called the Thin Man, but just a strange, tall or unnaturally thin figure dressed in black. Something that seemed to stretch or move in a way that a human body wouldn't normally or shouldn't normally. Because if there are more accounts like this, then I would really love to hear them. Now, I have got a little challenge for you guys, but before I do that, let me say a massive thank you to everybody that's submitted in those stories. Mike, Michael, Nick, Wayne, Mike and Michael. Thank you to you all, and thank you to everybody that submitted the stories. There really were some good ones, and it was really hard to narrow it down to just 5 for this episode. And like I say, if you'd like to hear some of the others, please let me know in the comments and I'll try and get that sorted. Oh, and thank you to everybody that's watched the video and everybody that comments and likes and subscribes and stuff, because you're really helping the channel to grow and allowing me to carry on doing videos like this. So for that challenge, what I'd like you to do between now and maybe next week, ask a member of your family or a close friend or maybe even a close neighbour that you've not really spoken to before about this topic. Ask them if they've ever had a really strange or unusual or paranormal experience, something that they can't explain. And who knows, you might end up having a conversation that you've never imagined having. And if there are some really good ones, then obviously see if they won't mind getting in touch and sharing them with us as well. Because the only way sometimes we can understand these stories is by gathering together as many as we possibly can and seeing whether there's a pattern anywhere in a particular part of the country or in a particular way that these stories are developing. So until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and for goodness sake, don't have nightmares.